Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with Australian-based artist and business coach for artists, Fiona Valentine. She helps women recognize and develop their creativity, and in turn, she has created a community in the Confident Artist Facebook group, helping women build a creative habit, make beautiful art, and learn the art of selling art. Since 2015, she's been coaching artists to paint for fun and for profit, even if they never sold any of their work before. Fiona's mission is to help each student enjoy their creativity and to discover that real artists don't starve, they thrive. She has a great story. Enjoy this interview.
Good morning, or good evening, good afternoon for you.
Yeah. Well, it's afternoon here. What time are you at over there?
It's 7 o'clock in the morning here.
Oh, wow. I love the future, so I love these calls.
Yeah.
I am located in Kansas City, Missouri. Where exactly are you at?
I'm in Melbourne.
Wonderful. Thank you for taking a minute out. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So I want to start off here and ask you because, we went through quite a time for 2 years with COVID, and now we're coming out of it. How did you do during COVID, and how did it change you?
Being a painter, it's great if you've got a studio at home, which fortunately for me, I did. So from that aspect, I was already working from home. So it didn't change life greatly from that point of view. It drastically changed my teaching, and I had just opened up luxury art retreats. And I was really enjoying doing that and making that my primary focus. And of course, that went out the window. I had only just finished the second retreat when lockdown happened. And of course, in Melbourne, we were, I think, one of the most lockdown cities in the world. So intense time. But for me, the main thing that came out of that was just reevaluating what I was doing and looking at the fact that I had been focused on my role as an artist, but primarily my work as a teacher is even more core to who I am. So I think that season really helped me to reprioritize that I wasn't teaching so that I could paint more, but that painting was part of my teaching. And so I really focused on what I had been doing alongside of my class teaching, which was coaching individual artists and combining my interests in art, business, and teaching. And I really love that process of helping an artist develop and step into their dreams. So I've embraced doing that as my primary role, and I really think that's perfect for me. So for me, that was a really positive thing that came out of that difficult season. If you were in front of a group of grade school kids and they had to ask you for kind of a synopsis of what you do for a living, how would you explain that to them? I'm a business coach for artists. I help artists to learn their sales and marketing skills that they need so they can make a living as an artist. The one thing I do also is I do visual arts. I have shows routinely here in the Kansas City area. So I kind of understand how this works, but I'm curious, what is your approach when an artist comes up and says, look, I'm trying to make a living, I have a product. What is it that you do to kind of figure out who they are and give them the best model to succeed? Yeah, but we definitely start with questions because I think starting with who you are is absolutely key because there's so many different ways to make art. And I believe that if you do what you really love to do, then your ideal customers are going to be people who will also love what you love. So knowing yourself is a good key to knowing your ideal clients. I think a big part of an artist realization of how they're going to do this thing, how they're going to make a living, is just recognizing that it's an unusual profession. We don't usually finish training, finish university, or a self-taught or whatever, and step out into a job. So if you're not looking for grants or picked up by a gallery, then that really means that you're in business. You're an artist entrepreneur. So I like artists to start by acknowledging that and seeing that selling their art isn't selling out. It's an extension of your creativity. So how long have you been an artist? How did this all begin for you? I was about 34-ish when I decided I really wanted to get back to painting. I'd done some in high school, and then travel, marriage, motherhood took off early for me. So in my 30s, I went to the local library and borrowed every book I could to learn to paint, and made some questionable paintings for quite a while. After a couple of years, I did more workshops, and I went to the Australian Guild of Realist Artists for a week-long masterclass, and that was just revolutionary for me, looking at the skills of the masters, how to just grow my own painting visual language. It was a wonderful experience, and that really solidified for me that I wanted to paint more. So at the time, I was working as an admin manager, and I gradually built up classes. I was teaching art lessons on the side until I could replace my salary and step into working full-time in my art business. And over time, that's morphed from focusing on painting, teaching classes, into coaching as a business coach for artists.
And you've had some pretty interesting experiences. You raised your first baby in a mud house without electricity or water in Africa. Talk to me a little bit about how these experiences have enhanced the way that you not only run your business, but make art.
Fundamentally, for me, the thing that really came out of that African experience was, at the time, my creativity felt frivolous. I just couldn't really see how that wasn't self-indulgent in the context that I was in, where finding water, organising food, dealing with sick children was a daily reality for people around me. If I'd really looked, if I'd not sort of taken that stance, I think I would have noticed that the women around me were being very creative in the midst of their lives, decorating things, embroidering things. It was just a normal part of life for them. But for me, it was a bit of a crisis. And I made a decision not to pursue my creativity in that context, not understanding how core creativity is to being human. I didn't realise how much damage I was doing myself. So it took me a long time back in Australia to sort of unravel that thinking and realise, wait a minute, enjoying my creativity is really core to who I am as a human being. So that I did do some painting while I was there. I met an artist from Berlin, Jens Reulicher, who was working in a completely different style than me, but had a really interesting communication with nomads who would look at his very abstract art and have these great, deep, philosophical, spiritual conversations based on his paintings. So that was really interesting to get to know him. But for the most part, art wasn't playing a strong role in my life in those years. It wasn't too much later. And looking back, that's really formed some of my ideas about creativity, that it's not just for artists and designers, but it's we need it for every industry. Not so much the particular outcome, it's the process of going from idea to that outcome, whether it's dance, whether it's art, whether it's manufacturing or medicine. It's this amazing ability our brains have to take all the different ways of thinking and come up with unique solutions, whether that's a painting solution or some kind of invention or an education solution.
So you've been at this for decades with teaching and painting and business, and I'm curious, what's been the best fan letter you've ever gotten? Response to a painting or services you've given, something that resonates with you?
Oh, that's a lovely question. Actually, I had a lovely one yesterday. I was talking with a woman who has got a lot of paintings, looking at learning to sell them, and I was telling her about my coaching program. She said, oh my goodness, I feel like all my dreams have just come true in one day, which was a beautiful response to, just to hear that for somebody what I do is exactly what she needed. I had a response from an artist here in Australia, Craig Penny, not long ago, and it was a typically Australian response, and it did make me laugh. He commented that working with me had been bloody marvellous. So they're two step-ups.
Who've been role models for you? Who have you admired or looked up to in your life?
There's a long list. Number one is an 1850s woman, Caroline Chisholm, who was an historical character here in Australia. And she actually obviously came from England and was working with a lot of the women who were arriving on convict ships to come and work in Australia, single women, and obviously their circumstances were dire. She had come here with her, I think, army husband. But it's an amazing story. She used to be on our $5 bill. It's one of those women who is, has a family. She and her husband had a really strong relationship, but she found herself in a time of struggle. The Irish potato famine happened around that time. She actually went back to England to help Irish migrants come to Australia and find new lives. There's a book written about her called 50 Pieces of Wedding Cake, because 50 women literally sent her a piece of their wedding cake as a thank you for the connections she helped them make in starting new lives. So she doesn't have anything to do with art, but she's always been someone I look up to. Because what I do is kind of eclectic, there are artists whose stories I really love. Some of the Australian Impressionists, Tom Roberts, Arthur Streeton, Frederick McCubbin, their stories really become linked with mine because one of my mentors studied, and you can directly trace the line from Frederick McCubbin to several other artists, and then Joe, and then me. And I love that actual relational connection to some of our art history. And then I've got, business mentors. My husband has actually been a huge part of what I do now. He's a certified lean practitioner and a Six Sigma consultant. And we've had a lot of talks about where the struggles of people learning to paint overlap with companies implementing continuous improvement programs, because both require us to be vulnerable and to tap into our creativity. But the struggle is that, 50% of people don't think they're creative, when in reality 100% of people are. So learning about lean and the way that helps companies with continuous improvement, that's found its way into my art and business coaching, and that's been really helpful and interesting. So it's kind of a long answer, and it goes in lots of different directions for me.
So who's your favorite visual artist?
That is very hard for me to choose. If I absolutely had to choose, I'd probably say in the past, Arthur Streeton. In the present, Renato Machillo's work is amazing. He's a Canadian landscape artist, and just what he does is so atmospheric, just absolutely gorgeous. But I have a long list of artists whose work I really love, but they're two that I particularly appreciate, as I love landscapes.
So if you could meet somebody alive on the planet today, who would it be?
I'd love to meet Caroline. Caroline Chisholm, the historical character that I mentioned to you, because I think the story of a woman here in Australia in a time when finding her place as a woman, juggling being a mother and a wife and dealing with the things in her community that she was struggling with, the way that she did that was amazing. I'd love to have a conversation with her.
So if you have a dream tonight and you run into the younger version of yourself, say around, when you were 20, and you could give your younger version one piece of advice based on the wisdom that you've accumulated over all these years, what would you say to your young version?
I would say, Fiona, you are creative. You can't just set that part of you aside. Enjoy it. And if you end up working associated with your creativity in an obvious way, great. But it doesn't matter. It's who you are, so enjoy it on a daily basis. So the other part of it was, I would just say, recognize first that you're a teacher, because I knew that, and then I sort of moved away from it, and I've come back to that.
From what I do, from like a jazz music perspective, is I'm always curious to know like how strong the art form is, and I'm curious too because I have a lot invested to a good degree with the fact that I am a working visual artist with shows here in Kansas City. And I'm curious how, because I know in Kansas City, a lot of people don't realize we actually have a really thriving art scene. But I'm curious from your perspective in Australia and even what you know globally, how strong is the artist community globally? How strong are the visual arts? Like, we always think that we hit a stagnant period, or there's a particularly thriving period of things, whether it's music or visual arts. What is your perspective on visual arts right now in 2022?
I think it's very strong. I really love the way that the art educators who are really teaching the old skills of realism have just thrived with the internet. There's so much capacity for people to share their work and get really world-class training, even from their own homes. And that whole side of things that not a lot of people are aware of necessarily, absolutely thriving. And there is some incredible work being created now. And there are dozens of these ateliers that have just got excellent training happening. And I think too, in the COVID years, that people were perhaps surprised that art sales, particularly online, just boomed, perhaps because people weren't travelling and they were at home and they were needing something great to look at. Whatever it was, it certainly didn't, for the most part, lead to a downturn, but more an upturn. So I think on lots of fronts, the art scene is really thriving, and it may be changing. And I think we're always in a state of change, aren't we? Sometimes it's just a little bit faster than at other times. But I think the internet obviously has given artists a really unique ability to reach out across the world and find collectors. And I think more artists are learning to tell their own story in really unique and authentic ways, thanks to the internet.
So everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, those that get your artwork, those that are your clients, but you ultimately live your life. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
There's so many different angles I could define that from. But number one for me is absolutely a disciple of Jesus. My faith informs everything that I do, and it's actually been the glue of my marriage. That's how my husband and I met. We were both working in Africa. He's from the US, and that's just the core of our friendship. And then secondly, I would say that the creative and teaching part of me just run really deep, and I recognise that in the way that I pick up new information. I love learning, but for me the excitement is not even in doing what I learn, it's figuring out how do I make this easier for the person who comes behind me. So I think that creative teacher would be how I would describe myself.
Fiona, thank you for taking some time out today, opening up about your life, and good luck with everything as we move forward.
Thank you so much. A pleasure talking with you, Joe.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, and music around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.